Hello everyone, welcome back to another video. So, as you can probably tell from the title, today we're going to be looking at the topic of what do we sing? How do we worship God? Now, on the surface, it seems very simple. As you can see on the screen, I have Colossians 3:16 up, part of the verse is highlighted, where it tells us we should be singing psalms, hymns, and spiritual songs. And to us English speakers, that seems as if it's three separate things. To us, it seems as if we're allowed to sing psalms, the Psalms of David. We're allowed to sing hymns, the great hymns of the past, contemporary hymns, whatever, and we're allowed to sing spiritual songs too. That's a sort of surface level reading on the text, and it's very understandable to think in that way. I myself used to think in that way. The thing is, though, when you go deeper and take a look at the Greek, which is what we'll be doing today, you find that actually that isn't quite right. Our sort of modern English speaking understanding of this text and also of what it says in Ephesians 5:19, where it says also that we should be singing psalms, hymns, and spiritual songs, our understanding of that isn't quite right. Um, and that is due to us using a translation rather than using the Greek. We're looking at it from our 21st century lens and understanding it um, with by looking through our sort of cultural lens, understanding it the way we've been told, the way we've seen around us, and just really applying our own knowledge to it rather than going and finding out what Paul actually meant when he wrote it. And in today's video, I'll be attempting to do that, to go back and show you what Paul meant, what Paul was actually saying, and what the first century readers would have understood when they read his letter. So we will be looking at the Greek text. I'll put up this, so this has the translation as well as the Greek, just so it's easier for those of you who don't yet know Greek. And yeah, so this is Colossians 3:16, and here I just want to focus on the three different words. So for psalms, psalmis, hymns, hymnis, and songs, odes. It's fairly straightforward. If we look at Ephesians 5:19, we see the same three words. And yeah, spiritual songs, pneumatikes, odes. So yeah, it seems fairly straightforward still, like, psalms, hymns, spiritual songs. When we're looking at the Greek text, look, we have the translation here. That's a hymn. That's a song. That's a psalm. That's just how we translate it, how we understand it. The same for Ephesians 5. Psalm, down here, hymnos, hymn, and odes, song. Very, very straightforward. The thing is, however, when we look at the LXX, the Septuagint, that is the sort of Old Testament that the first century readers would have been using, the Greek Old Testament of that time. When we look at that, we find that the Psalms aren't just called Psalms. And that's a very important, yet pretty minor detail to note. It seems like such a small thing, like, well, what does it matter? But when we sort of get into it and understand, then it makes so much more sense as to what Paul is saying here. We understand it far better. And we can see that what Paul means by these three words, I believe, is that we should only be singing psalms, exclusive psalmody. So let's look first at the word psalmos, meaning psalm. So it's fairly obvious that it would be. If we look here, mostly mentioned in the Psalms, in the LXX and the Septuagint. So this is the Bible, the Old Testament, most first century readers would have been using. Every Greek-speaking one would be using this one. This was the only translation they had at the time, so we can know without a doubt this is the one they were using. It's even quoted in the New Testament. Most of the time when they're quoting from the Old Testament, they're quoting from this translation, from the Septuagint. So we can trust that this is a Bible they knew and this is a Bible they used. So let's just click on this. Psalmos do David, a psalm by David. Very simple. So I think we all know that the Psalms are psalms. So fairly straightforward. It's pretty easy. Now, the word or the. This is interesting because look, it's got a lot of occurrences also in the Psalms. Yeah, it's got mentions elsewhere, but the majority of the occurrences are in the Psalms. So when we open up one of these, for example, Psalm 64 verse 1, Psalmos to David or thee. So the psalm is titled a Psalm of David, it says here a Psalm by David, a song. So it matters a lot that it is being called a song, because we see not only are lots of the Psalms named Psalmos, not only are lots of them titled a Psalm of David or whatever, some are also titled a song. So when Paul is saying, if we go back to the Greek, psalmis, hymnis, or this, we find that, well, this, Psalms, refers to something we find in what we call the Psalms, in the Old Testament book, but so does the word odes. And now you might say, okay, well, these two both refer to the Psalms. What about hymnis? Well, the thing is, it's the same with that. If we look, yes, it's sort of less frequent. The word hymn doesn't occur as much as the other ones, but still, psalms, psalms, psalms. You see, you see it's used in the Psalms a lot. And it's important to note also that it's verse 1. If you see verse 1, showing that it's a title, it's not a word used halfway through the psalm, it's a title. So when we look here, this is another example. Hymnis to David. It's a sort of hymn of David. Let's look at this one. On stringed instruments, a song. So again, we see this, the word for song, is used in the Septuagint as a title for psalms. Let's just look at another one. We can have a look at this one and see what this says. That's not as relevant, but if you take the time to look through them all, you'll find that the title is again used in the book of Psalms as a category for psalms. So in the LXX, there's actually 4 different categories of psalms, 4 different titles that are given. So there's psalmos, and that's used for the majority of psalms. Then there's hymnos, which isn't used for that many psalms. That's the sort of lesser used one. Hence, as you see here, there's a lot, it occurs a lot less. It's a lot less frequent. We simply don't see it as much. But it still exists, and it's still there. And then we have Odi, as you see here, translated a song. This occurs quite a lot too, as a title. And we also have synesis, which means understanding. And that's used for a few psalms too, but that isn't as relevant to this discussion. But what I'm trying to show is when Paul wrote to the Ephesians and to the Colossians, and he spoke of them singing psalms, hymns, and spiritual songs, I think it's a very strong argument to say that what Paul meant wasn't just the book of Psalms plus. What he meant was the book of Psalms, the hymns, and the spiritual songs, as in all of the stuff you find in the book of Psalms, the sort of entirety of the Psalms. So you're going to be singing Psalms, you're going to be singing the spiritual songs, which we call Psalms, you're going to be singing the hymns, which we call Psalms. The problem is we consider all 150 to be Psalms, but in the Greek not all 150 are Psalms, as I hope I've demonstrated. But if you don't believe me, you can go and check this out for yourself. I think obviously you shouldn't take everything people say online at face value, you should do some research. But through my own personal research, it's my conviction that this is indeed what Paul's meaning, and it makes sense if we think about it, because the Colossians, we know that in the book of Colossians, Paul's writing to them, and he's trying to correct two sort of errors. The first are the Judaizers trying to force Jewish beliefs, the sort of Old Testament ceremonial laws onto the people, and we also have the Greeks with the sort of pagan Greek religion, and these two heresies have invaded the church, and Paul's writing against them. And if we think of the Ephesians, similar is happening. These are both churches. Paul's writing the letter not to praise them but to correct them. These are both churches fresh out of heresy. They're churches with serious theological problems that Paul is correcting. There's abuses, there's mismanagement, there's false teaching, there's heresy, damnable heresy in these churches. So it wouldn't make sense, quite frankly, if Paul was writing to them and saying to make up their own hymns and spiritual songs, because it would be, I feel it would be unwise to tell a church fresh out of heresy that they're just permitted to make their own music, since they're fresh out of heresy. There's had serious errors, so I don't think they're at a stage where they can be trusted to make their own music. If Paul was writing to churches which were perfect, the best church in all the land, the greatest church, then yeah, I think it would be a fairly decent argument to say that, well, maybe he did mean three separate things. But I think when looking at, firstly, the context of the Psalms, because the first century readers would understand these three things as referring to the three categories of Psalms. And when we also understand the context of the church, the state of those two churches, I think it's quite clear to us that Paul did just mean to sing Psalms. And unfortunately, we, with our English translations, have somewhat lost that, because it's more obscure now. It's lesser known. It's not as obvious, unfortunately. But I think to the first century readers, it would have been very obvious. And I hope I've helped show, even if, you don't believe me, you don't agree with me, that's fine. But hopefully I've just shown you a different side to it. A reason for why I think we should only sing psalms. I hope I've managed to get my point across correctly and shown my perspective. I was out walking today, and I thought to myself, imagine if someone's saying sing hymnal A, hymnal B, and hymnal C. And then over time, hymnal A, B, and C get all squished together, and 2,000 years later, they're just being called hymnal A. When people read the instruction to sing hymnal A, B, and C, they're going to think, well, we have hymnal A, we don't have hymnal B and hymnal C. So they'll think, oh, we have the liberty to create hymnal B and hymnal C. I think that's a fairly logical conclusion. So, I think it's reasonable to think we can sing other things. I don't think it's correct, however. And I think, unfortunately, that misunderstanding has come out of our English. Because we call other things hymns now. We call other things spiritual songs. We call all 150 psalms, psalms. We don't call them hymns and spiritual songs. I think it would have made more sense, actually, if Paul wanted them to sing what we call hymns, to say poems, because really they are just poems put to music. But because of the change of the language, how we now mean different things by the same words, it's been lost. In Christian circles, even within the church. But yeah, I hope this video at least has got you to think. What did Paul mean? Did he mean we should be singing three different things? Or did he mean we should just sing psalms? Did he mean we can sing uninspired hymns? Or is it just the perfect word of God we're to sing? It's something to think about. So I hope this video has been informative and useful to you. I'd encourage you to do your own research. I've linked some resources in the description. God bless and goodbye.